represented more than 500 Mexican miners and had members in Jerome. In 1917, two miner strikes involving IWW, which had organized these strikes elsewhere in Arizona, and took place in Jerome. Now, it seemed like a threat to, and as well. So, imagine you're in Arizona and you come across this town that is in the Yavapai County, and this town is called Jerome. Now, this town was found in the late 19th century on the Cleopatra Hill overlooking the Verde Valley, and it is more than 5,000 feet above sea level, and it is also about 100-ish miles north of Phoenix along A9A between Sedona and Prescott. Now, this town was supported by its rich copper mines, and at one point it was home to more than 10,000 people in the 1920s, and its population now has dwindled to almost a ghost town of 464 people. Okay, welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. I know I haven't posted anything in a while. I've been really busy with work, and um, y'all know what I mean. When work is, you need the money to keep going, right? Now, for those of you who follow me, thank you. For those of you that are new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe, help a girl out. Um, so you're probably wondering, how did this town come about? Well, this town, um, kind of owes its existence primarily to like some ore bodies that formed about 0.75 billion years ago. It, it was along a ring fault cal in the caldera of undersea volcano. Now I have the theme song from The Big Bang Theory just stuck in my head. There's a universe dance mess. Anyway, I'm on my bed because I'm too lazy to clean my desk off, and I don't want to go in the living room because my roommate's in her room, and I don't want to interrupt her. But anyway, now due due to some tectonic plate movement, plate collisions, uplifts, and depositions and erosions and other geological processes eventually exposed the tip of one of those ore bodies and pushed them to the others to close the surface, both near Jerome. Now, in the late 19th century, the United Verde mine that was developed by William A. Clark would extract one bearing copper, gold, silver, and other metals from the larger of the two. Now, this United Verde extension was owned by James Douglas Jr., and it depended on the huge deposit as well. Now, in total, the copper deposits was discovered in Jerome's vicinity was among the richest ever found. Now, how did this town make, you're probably wondering, let's go back to 1917 now. What happened in 1917? Well, it made news in 1917 when the labor unrest involving the industrial workers of the world led to the expulsion at gunpoint of about 60 IWW workers who were loaded onto the cattle car and shipped west. Now, production of the mines always subject to a cattle cart and shipped west. Productions of the mines always subject to fluctuations boomed during and World War One and rose again and then fell again after the Great Depression. Now, as the ore deposits ran out, the mines closed for good in 1953, and the population dwindled to fewer than 100. Now, there have been efforts to save the town from this oblivion, and it succeeded when residents turned to tourism and retail sales. Jerome became a National Historic Landmark in 1967. By the early 21st century, it had art galleries, coffee houses, restaurants, state parks, and a local museum devoted to the mining history. So, let's talk about the history of this town for a minute. Well, we know that the Hokum were the first people that were believed to have lived and formed near Jerome from 700 to 1125 CE, and later, long before the arrivals of Europeans, it was likely that other native peoples mined the Univerb or for its colorful copper-bearing minerals and malachite and azurite, and the top of the ore body was accessible because it was visible from the surface. Now, the first Europeans we know would arrive in the area or the Spanish conquistadors. And at the time, the area was part of New Mexico, and the Spaniards often organized silver and gold prospecting expeditions in the area. In 1585, Spanish explorers would make note of the ore, but did not mine it because of their government had sent them to find gold and silver, but not copper. So, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the 19th century now. So, now Jerome became Jerome became part of Mexico when Mexico gained its independence from Spain. In 1821, part of the U.S., by terms of the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which concluded the Mexican-American War. Now, the war's major consequences was the Mexican cession of the northern territories of the Alta California and Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico to the U.S. And Angus Buchanan and Morris A. Ruffner filed the first copper mining claims at the location in 1876. Now, in 1880, Frederick A. Twiddle, who was the governor of the Arizona Territory, and Frederick F. Thomas, who was a mining engineer from San Francisco, brought these claims from the original owners in 1883 with the aid of the Eastern financiers James A. McDonald and Eugene A. Jerome of New York City. They created the United Verb Copper Company, and the small adjacent mining company on the Cleopatra Hill was named Jerome in honor of Eugene Jerome, as you might have guessed. Now, um, Jerome will become the company's secretary, and they will build a small smelter at the Jerome and constructed wagon wells from it to Prescott, Divert Valley, in the Atlantic and Pacific Railway Depot at Ash Fork. However, transport by wagon was expensive for the time, and in the late 1854, after the price of copper had fallen by 50%, the company ceased all operations on site. Now, 4 years later, William A. Clark, who had made a fortune in the mining commercial ventures in Montana, brought the United Verve and, among other improvements, enlarged the smelter. Now, he also ordered these constructions of the narrow gauge railroad of the United Verve and Pacific, the Jerome Junction, and a railway transfer that pointed to about 27 mil, which was a railway transfer that pointed in. The population grew from 250 to 1890 to more than 2,500 by 1900. By then, the company had became the leading copper producer in the Arizona Territory, employing about 800 men, and was one of the largest mines in the world. Over its 77-year life, this mine produced nearly 33 million tons of copper, gold, and silver, lead, and zinc, and everything. Now, Jerome, so in order for a town, most people don't know this, but you have to have a post office for a town. It to be considered a town. It used to be that, it still is. But they got their post office in 1883, and then the schoolhouse in 1884, a public library in 1889, and after four major fires between 1894 and 1898, it destroyed much of their business district and half the community homes. Jerome was then incorporated as a town in 1899, and the incorporation made it possible to collect taxes and build a formal firefighting and everything. Now, local merchants and rancher William Munns, also who was the first mayor. So, by 1900, Jerome had churches, a fraternal organization, and its downtown was brick buildings, telephone services, and electric lights. Among the thriving businesses were those associated with alcohol gambling, prostitution, and serving the population that was 78% male. In 1903, New York's The Sun proclaimed Jerome the wickedest town in the West, which leads us to the early 20th century. With that being said, Jerome was legally separate from the United Bird and supported many independent businesses and did not meet the definition of a company town, even though it depended for decades largely on a single company. However, in 1914, a single company was led by James S. Douglas Jr. and discovered a second ore bodies near Jerome that produced a bonanza. Did anybody else think of the show? Because I did. My stepdad used to watch it all the time growing up. Bonanza, bonanza, bonanza. I don't remember the theme song, but I know he used to watch it all the time. Yes, I know. I'm weird. I embrace my weirdness. I love learning about history and stuff like that. So, the UVX mine, also known as Little Daisy Mine, became spectacularly profitable, and during 1916 alone, it produced 10 million worth of copper, silver, and gold, which was of 7.4 million was profit. So, this mine would eventually produce more than 125 million worth of ore and pay more than 50 million in the dividends, and the total population amounted to 4 million tons, much less than the United Bird, and total, but from uncommonly rich and averaging more than 10% copper and class. Now, starting in 1914, World War I greatly increased the demand for copper, and by 1916, the number of companies involved in the mining near Jerome reached 22. These companies employed about 3,000 miners in the district. Meanwhile, the UVX was building a large smelter complex in the company town, Clarkdale, a standard gauge railway in the Verd Tunnel and the smelter railway, to haul ore from its mines to a new smelter. After a new railway opened in 1915, the company dismantled and Jerome was a smelter and converted the mines into an open pit operation by 1919. Now, the switch from the underground to open pit mining stemmed from a series of fires, some burning for decades in the mine's high sulfur ores. Removing the overburden of pouring a mixture of water ore, and sand into a rock fixtures helped control the fires. By 1918, UVX also had its own smelter and its own company near the Cottonwood, which was a company that was named Clemenceau in 1920. In 1929, a company demanded Verd Central open what at first appeared to be another great mine, how about a mile southwest. A labor situation in Jerome was complicated. There were three separate labor unions, which was the International Union, the Mine Hill, and the Smelter Workers, the Industrial Workers of the World, and the Ligma Protector Latina, which represented more than 500 Mexican miners and had members in Jerome. In 1917, two miners' strikes involving IWW, which had organized these strikes elsewhere in Arizona, and took place in Jerome. Now, it seemed like a threat to, and as well as labor unions too. Now, the MMSW, which in May called a strike against the United Verb, regarding its rival, the IWW, with anonymously would not recognize it as legitimate. So, response, the IWW windows, of course, they were threatened and had to break the strike. Now, under pressure, the MMSW would vote 467 to 431 to settle the less than they wanted. Now, in July, the IWW called for a strike against all the mines in the district. In this case, the MMSW would vote 470 to 194 against striking. And 3 days later, 250 vigilantes rounded up at least 60 suspected IWW workers, loaded them onto a railway cattle and everything. Now, what happened after 1920? Following the brief post-war turndown, boom town boom times returned to Jerome in the 1920s. Copper prices rose 24 cents a pound in 1929, and the UVX operated at the capacity. Wages rose, near spitting everything else. Now, in 1930, after the start of the Great Depression, the price of copper fell to 14 cents. And in response, the UVX began reducing its labor force, and the UVX operated at a loss and a third big mine as well. Now, meanwhile, a problem that happened that had irreparably damaged at least 10 buildings was and worsened through a dozen of them, including a post office and all of that. Now, mining continued at a reduced level in the district until 1953, when Phelps Dodge um, shut down the UVX and relocated operations, and Jerome's population did fall to below 100. It became a ghost town after all, because when it's high, it was busy and booming. Now, when it's low, it's like, nope, we could be a ghost town now. So, tourism would begin, of course, right? Because who doesn't want to go see a ghost town? I actually do want to go see a ghost town, so I can't raise my hand on that. But anyway, to encourage tourism, the town's leader would seek the National Historic Landmark status for Jerome, and it was granted by the federal government in 1967. In 1962, James Douglas Ayers donated the Douglas Mansion above the UVX mine site to the state of Arizona, which used to create the James State Historic Park by sponsoring music festivals and a lot more of that as well. Now, what do y'all think of this town? I'm very curious. But that's it for this episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day, and I will see y'all next time. And y'all, let's hope Tennessee beats. Let's get ready for that game this weekend with Tennessee and Georgia, because that's the game of the week, I believe.